Hello, I see people filtering in. Wow, that number is going up. Welcome, 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 welcome. We're so excited to have you all here today on this Tuesday afternoon.
It is Tuesday afternoon. Thanks for joining.
We've been speaking with designers Liz and I have been chatting, but we've been speaking with designers all day and are so excited to share with you some insight into how you can have a really great holiday despite what the economy does.
Despite what the economy does. And I really wanted to bring Kathleen on because we kind of ended the last chat, if you watched, how to sell on Instagram with, ways that you can reach out to your client. But Kathleen's really going to take us through the actual logistics and give examples. And we're going to talk through how to actually do that. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, this is our goal for you is that you leave this webinar at 5 o'clock and you sit down and start to actually take action on this. So this is not academic pieces we're talking about. Like, this is not theory. This is like in the trenches this week, next week, the week after. These are applicable skills that you can take and grow in your own business.
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen and let's get started here. Okay. All right. So I think many of you know this, but I'm Liz. I've worked in digital marketing since 2008. In 2012, I started working for Todd Reed as his marketing manager. Really, I started his social media from scratch, and I've seen since then the power of selling online, even luxury goods. So I know that this works. I know that Instagram is a powerful platform to sell. And then since 2016, I've helped hundreds of designers make their way in the jewelry industry. And I'm excited to keep helping designers. And I'm glad Kathleen is here. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kathleen Cutler. We started almost the same time in the industry, Liz, which is super fun to see and hear and think about. But I started actually as an apprentice jeweler. So I was on the bench making jewelry for a business based out of Western Massachusetts. And while I thought I wanted to be a designer, I loved the design process. I thought I wanted to have my own design brand. What I actually realized when I was on the bench was that I liked organizing jewelers much more. So that's where I really stepped into creating the systems and the structure that help artists thrive and help designers and retailers really make sure that they are cultivating the relationships with their student or their clients rather. And I then went on to the GIA, got a graduate diamond degree, stepped behind the scenes of a 7-figure e-commerce brand. We had over 10,000 items in our store. And now, since then, I help designers and retailers really have a virtual and modern jewelry business, which includes being online, but it's really much more about how can we have really beautiful relationships with our existing clients. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I do a lot of writing. You maybe have seen me on webinars with Liz in the past. We've spoken at New York Now together. Like, we've kind of been to New York together. Now we are spending most of our time virtually, Liz, though I wish we could be together in person.
Yeah, that would be really fun on that magical beer tour that you were just on.
Just on a bit of yes.
Yeah. And we've done a lot of lives together. So this is like, we've done this before. We've been here before, which is great. And I love talking to Kathleen because really where my expertise ends, hers begins in a lot of ways. And we really think about everything in similar ways. So I think that's great. So, starting there, we're going to start with talking about mindset. So really, I talk to designers all the time, and a lot of you are makers, a lot of you are artists, and selling is really out of your comfort zone.
100%. And Liz and I really spend our days speaking to designers and small retailers. And it's really so often we kind of hear this like icky feeling that people have when it comes to sales. And a lot of, when Liz and I were planning this out, we really wanted to make sure that we were addressing these kind of elephants in the room, because if we don't talk about what goes on in your brain, if we don't have don't give you the ability to step into a healthy mindset around doing some of these actions, it's really easy when you're in the trenches, when you're in DM looking to re-engage with these lapsed leads or clients that aren't responding to you, to kind of have these mindset gremlins talk you out of communicating, talk you out of taking action. So lots of times, and maybe in the chat, we'd love to hear from you if you can relate to any of these, but lots of times the students I work with say things like, after years, it feels yucky to me to reach out to someone who hasn't been engaged with me. This feels fake. Reaching out feels forced and inauthentic. I feel like a door-to-door salesman. And Liz, do you want to, we'll stop the share for a moment and we'll just kind of go into chat between the two of us. What do you hear, Liz? What do you hear kind of that comes up for mindset? And we'd love to hear in the chat as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times artists feel like they're being pushy. A lot of artists want to stay at their bench. Like they're like, my goal is to be at my bench and not have to deal with sales. But it's interesting because I've been, to many trunk shows. I've been face to face with many artists in selling situations, and they're great at it. Nobody knows their product better than them. They're so passionate about what they're doing, and they really have this authentic way of selling. And it really does truly take practice, and kind of getting over some of these mental hurdles of what's holding you back. And I can relate to them 1000%, because as somebody who is running her own business and needs to talk about my services and products and things I offer, it's not comfortable to do, and it gets easier the more you do it.
100%. And I think that it's really about remembering that sales is an act of service. So we, the people who have and I love when we start to think about, so we kind of are talking through the gremlins, right? Like these things pop up. And I'm sure when we had that screen up, a lot of you can relate. And Liz is saying, and I'm saying the same, like I can understand as someone else who runs their own business, like how having these conversations can be difficult. But it's really when we start to have the reframe that it's education, that it is an act of service, and that you're truly a matchmaker. If people are interested in your work, it's really about how can you find the right piece for them. So in some ways, it's really having this beautiful shift in your own mind of the more I can connect deeply with my clients, really understand them, what they're looking for, and then find that perfect piece. Because as you're saying that, Liz, it's so true. When we're really walking the floors together at trade shows and you're really speaking to a designer who loves their work, they can talk to you for a long time about the labradorite they found and where they sourced it and how they came up with this idea, and that it was inspired by Roman architecture that, they studied and went back and they went to Egypt to learn about it, all these different things. And sometimes when we're online, it's hard to access that, that almost remembering that it's much more beyond just this piece, but there's a story that really influences this piece as well. So I think that when we are dealing with these objections, it feels super salesy. Then, sorry, I was reading the chat. There's some really good stuff. I feel really pushy if I start to talk sales. It's this reframing of sales into service, into education. You're really just having this beautiful shared love of jewelry. And I think the more you can remember, I have a client who had one of her clients, she knew his wife's birthday was coming up. So she reached out with the framework that we're going to talk through here in a moment. But she reached out, she initiated this conversation and she said, hey, Paul, I have this amazing pair of topaz earrings. I think that Suzanne would love these earrings. And he reached back oh my God, thank you. I didn't know what to get her. So when we can really remember Paul, remember these people, remember these even self-purchasers who are wondering what to get. Liz and I had a fun chat before where we were telling each other what kind of luxe things we're lusting after. But it's true, we want to buy things from people who we know their name, we can identify with, we really deeply connect with. So as we go through the framework kind of in the next moments here, we want you to think through the mindset needed to soothe those gremlins as they come up. Who am I to talk about this? I don't want to be too salesy. I don't want to be too pushy. And really just refocus everything through a lens of this is me being of service. This is me connecting with another jewelry lover and really making sure that the pieces, I don't think any jeweler or designer really creates pieces so they can sit in their studio and collect dust in their showroom. They really like, it's really about creating a piece so it's worn, so it's experienced, so people wear it and travel and go out to dinner and all the things we're not currently doing right now. But so it's worn, so it's loved. And I think that really starting to reframe, even in the virtual space, that the more visible you are, the more connections you make, the more leads you get, and then the more sales you can make as well.
Definitely. I mean, how many times have you heard from a designer, oh, I keep selling stuff right off of my body? It's like you're wearing it, you're loving it, and it's leading to a sale and you're not even trying. So if you're like honing in on that skill and you're practicing, it's totally possible to make sales. And I want to mention also real quick before we dive into the framework is that like you don't need a totally buttoned up website to do this. And you certainly don't need 10,000 Instagram followers. And I talk to a lot of designers that's like, oh, well, if only I had more Instagram followers, I'd be able to sell jewelry. I'd be able to sell my jewelry. I'd have more sales. And that's truly not the answer. It's this mindset shift. And it's really focusing on reaching out and nurturing relationships and really pushing sales in a way that feels authentic.
I love that. And we were talking, Liz and I, as we were preparing for this, we're talking about how like when we can reframe sales from being this like separate thing and realize that we're negotiating and selling literally all day. Like you're selling when you sell someone on a coffee shop, or you're selling when you sell someone, hey, this movie I saw was really great, or this book, I think you would love it. Like we're natural salespeople because that's kind of this, it comes from this place of like sharing and abundance and like, oh my God, check this out. I think you would love this. I have a 2.5-year-old, so I'm like literally always selling him on like the next thing. He's currently in this phase where he doesn't want the thing he's currently doing to end. So it's like my day is consistently like negotiating and figuring out how to sell him on, yeah, we should be done with this bath. Like we've got to do the next thing and we're going to go downstairs and see the dog. And he's like, oh, we're going to see the dog. And then he's sold. So the more we can start to recognize that sales skills, though they can be improved, though they can be honed, and there can be frameworks, do exist in kind of this larger bubble of relationship. And we are in relationship and everywhere in our lives. And it's no different with our clients. So the more we can have this skill that we're learning, but the more we can also recognize like, oh, I'm good at this. Like I love to be suggesting restaurants or books or magazines to my friends, and with my toddler the same. So the more you can start to give yourself some breathing room around like this can be a learned skill, but it's an innate skill really as well. And once we kind of like make some tweaks and cracks and codes around mindset, it gets really fun. And I think that that's like when we can have it feel a little bit more fun, especially in the virtual space, it starts to take some of the pressure off. And you really remember that you are, what a privileged position we are all in, right? Like we get to spend our days looking at jewelry, talking about jewelry, thinking about jewelry, sourcing new stones, chatting with people who also love jewelry. So when we can kind of like take some of that pressure of the final sale off of things and really just, I love to have this kind of concept of like, let's just always be opening conversations. It's like the opposite of always be closing, kind of that old school sales technique. That's like always be opening conversations, opening to, potential and possibility as well. Liz, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I think about when I first got into social media, it was very much because I was fascinated by this ability to connect. And at that time, I was writing tweets for these like massive brands, and we've come a long way since then. That was over a decade ago. And I'm still very connected to the fact that there's so much power to have conversations one-on-one with potential clients. And that sort of connection that you make with people really does last, especially if you nurture it and you continue to check in and you continue to thoughtfully engage with them. And it just still blows my mind that people who I have connected with for years online who end up purchasing jewelry from my clients, or find designers through me and end up purchasing. There's a lot of power in online shopping. And right now we're in a really exciting period. We're entering holiday. The world might feel crazy, which we'll talk about that in mindset also in a minute. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity right now. And it doesn't mean you need to run, high budget Facebook ads. And it doesn't mean that you need to dump a bunch of money into creating a perfect website or doing a big photo shoot, or, really focus on growing your Instagram following. You want to focus on engagement and authentic connection. And that's really kind of where we want to be right now. And one of the like big things I keep hearing about mindset is like, the world is crazy. Like, I don't want to be selling jewelry. I feel weird that I do sell jewelry. So Kathleen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I love this question. And I think that as artists, like the more we can feel these things, and that's going to seem a little silly, but the more we can like have the space to feel the chaos and to feel like the sadness that a lot of people are going through, the more we can have like our own private process, like whether that's journaling or running or singing or painting or creating jewelry, the more we can have like that process in that space to kind of process some of these things, the more we can step into our role as selling, right? Like this is our business role, and really recognize that additionally, selling is an act of service to your community. Like I truly believe the more wealthy jewelers that we have, the more wealthy artists, the more wealthy women, the more wealthy retailers that we have, when we put money into good people's hands, they do good things with it. Like it's really just the bottom line. Like Liz and I spend 4 times what we could have spent with small boutiques, right? She bought these beautiful linen sheets. I don't know why I can't remember.
Yeah, linen sheets. I'm obsessed with linen sheets.
She's like currently obsessed with linen sheets. But when you're working with Liz and that's an investment you're making in Liz, like she's also taking that money and investing it in small, well-run businesses. And it's the same when I'm working with my students, the money that comes into my world, like it goes to my CSA, it goes to my local farmers, I pay my nanny really well, like all these different things. So I think the more we can really understand our role in the larger society, like what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be a working artist? And the more we can grapple with that, through our art, and then the more we can say, okay, perfect. My role is to be a conduit for money. So I am happy to charge high prices, and I recognize that I'm a good steward of money when it comes to me. So if that for you, a lot of my students end up doing some sort of philanthropical arm of their business where they identify a few pieces where a large percentage is donated to a charity of their choice. That makes it feel like, okay, now I understand that I'm this beautiful conduit. And sometimes that can be enough of a flip of remembering that selling is this act of service because you have this platform larger than yourself. So that can be, really this beautiful reframe is one, feel the feelings, right? I think it's really when we try to stuff it down and just pretend things aren't happening, that it comes out weird. One, when we're like trying to figure out our content plan, but 2, maybe when we're on a sales call. But it's really about how can you recognize that you're a beautiful conduit and a beautiful steward of money, and the more you make, the more you keep it going, right? And like really embrace that kind of flow. And I guess it's got a little esoteric, but those are my thoughts, that when artists are wealthy, they do really great things with their money.
Right. And art is so important. And that's something everyone needs to keep reminding themselves. And then also, people are buying jewelry. And I know that's like a hard thing to say when there's a lot of stuff going on, and a hard thing to think about when you're an artist and a maker, and you're affected by the world, as we all are. But people are buying jewelry. They're not traveling this year. They might not travel for much of next year. There's budgets. And we're going into a holiday season where people want to make it feel extra special. So just keep remembering that people are buying jewelry.
Oh, and that like gives me chills. And it's so important to disassociate your own bank account with your customer's bank account, and just recognize that it's just a different amount of zeros. For me to spend $160 might be, for what your clients, it feels like to spend $16,000. And the more we can embrace that, the more we can say, oh, amazing. And look, they've paid me $16,000 and I'm a good steward of that money. So it comes through me and it goes to my own arts community and I support my people. But I think it's really important and it can be really easy when you're an artist and a designer, to be surrounded by, as Liz was just saying, people who are in the restaurant industry and potentially struggling, other artists, or especially visual artists who aren't performing at the same rate right now. But we have to remember that there's a whole huge population of people who have not been affected financially. And in fact, as Liz was just saying, actually have a higher budget line for gifts this year than they have in the past. Because I would say that's like, having worked behind the scenes of so many businesses, that's like the number one objection we find is like, oh, I decided to go a different way this year. We're going to Aspen, or I decided to do something else this year. And now people are not traveling, but they want this really special occasion. So this is really where, when we can shift your mindset into selling as an act of service, you have the ability to make someone's holiday really special, to plan a surprise birthday gift, to give the gift of custom. There's so many options here of like what you're actually selling. But it's really amazing when you can start to kind of shift this in your mind, that this is actually a way to contribute to the larger good.
Definitely. We have a question from Linda that I just want to touch on. Should you mention a piece of jewelry is available for purchase? Yes, definitely. Calls to action are super important. And I would play around with different ways to say that, invite people to message you, invite them to visit your website, get them talking to you. I think that's super important. And we'll dive into that more in the framework, but always a call to action. Always make sure your audience knows you're selling.
Yes, 100%. And yeah, I love that segue. And that's actually a really good segue. Anything else on mindset, Liz, that you want to talk before we move kind of more into the framework that we'll be going over today?
Yeah, I just want to say again and reiterate that this is a constant practice. Like, you might need sticky notes. You might need to tell yourself this every morning, that you're a business and you're selling and you are doing good. Like, you're doing what you should be doing. You're creating this beautiful work, and you're doing this act of service to sell it to people and bring joy to them, or however you want to frame it, however it makes sense to you, whatever feels good to you. It's constant practice.
100%. And like, you might have to create some rituals around this. Like, and I think it doesn't go without saying, that maybe Liz, you covered this in your last webinar, but be aware of how much you're consuming versus creating. It can be really fatiguing to just consume on Instagram and not actually be creating. So the more you can figure out your rituals that you kind of sit down at the bench in and create from a place of this kind of like, I've got some people in mind who love these pieces. And then when you're on social media, on email, you're not just reacting and consuming, but you're actually stepping into kind of creation and connection with people. That can be a really great way to make sure you're not just like flat out exhausted. And it's really focusing on the right things. So you might find too that you want to have like a special time where you're on Instagram, for example, when we get more into the framework, and responding to people. Like, you're actually dedicating that time. Or you might find like, I need to like light some sage before I do this kind of like connection. Like, just, I love to think about how can we create the same success that we've seen kind of in the physical space and trade shows or your retail store in the same virtual space. So sometimes it is kind of tricking yourself. Like, I know that there are 157 people watching us, Liz, but I'm alone in my studio. Right? Like, this is a little bit of playing pretend, of like remembering that Liz is a real person and all 157 of you are real. There's real people in the chat. But the more you can kind of start to play, have it feel a little bit lighter, have it feel a little bit more playful. Books are great. There's so many books on money mindset. Tapping is amazing with the Women's Jewelry Association of New York Metro. Delphine actually walked us through like a tapping exercise. So it's some really great things. And you'll just get better and better. It's a muscle. We would never step on the bench and feel that we could like solder a ring together and like set a stone. But somehow we feel that like, oh, now that I'm selling on my own, I should just be good at this. And we can be so down on ourselves, but it's really just an art and something that you'll continue to grow and grow.
Definitely. Do you want to dive into the framework?
Let's do it.
Cool. Let me start my share. And yeah, to that point, if you're here, let us know and feel free to ask questions. We'll get to the Q&A at the end, or answer your questions as they're relevant, but would love to know that you're here and you're watching. Okay.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to walk you through the Legacy Collector framework, and then we'll basically like pull this down and kind of like talk through each phase. But the very first phase is that you need to know your extremely important collectors. Like, this is like phase 0. This is baseline phase. And it's so important to actually write their names down, know them by name, know what they've bought in the past, and what collection they may be interested in. This is kind of like this matchmaking phase. So if Liz, if you want to stop sharing here for a moment, I feel I don't want to go too far ahead.
Yeah, understandable.
But actually, I was on a little trip with a girlfriend over the weekend, and we were talking, obviously, as we do, about business. And I was telling her about like this framework, and I was telling her about phase zero in particular. And she was like, you know what, Kathleen, it's almost like when you make a mixtape, because, we're kind of like nostalgic about mixtapes, but she was like, it's the difference between making a mixtape or making a mixtape for someone really particular and specific. So with phase zero, the more we can remember that there are real people on the other end of the screen and know who our best clients are. This is really the foundation of everything I teach, is really understanding who your extremely important collectors are by name, by what they might be interested in. Some of my students even actually, as they're creating pieces, have a little sticky note on their desk of like, piece would be great for X. This piece would be great for Kelly. This piece would be great for Sarah. This piece would be great for Paul. So they actually, as they're creating pieces, right? And if we think of my friend, you're creating a mixtape for someone specific, someone in particular. So the more we can know these people, and the very first way is to just write them down on a piece of paper, stick them on your wall. You can move into an Excel spreadsheet. Kind of the best case scenario is a more complex like CRM type system. But again, we don't need anything complicated to implement any of the strategies we're talking about today. As Liz said, and it can't be reiterated enough, you don't need an expensive website. You don't need crazy, intense professional photography. All you need is people who've bought from you in the past and the desire and ability to reconnect with them again. So this is phase zero. And I would say this is your task after this call today, is to go ahead and write down at least 5 extremely important collectors. They could be the people who've bought some of your most important pieces, the people who've bought from you again and again. You'll kind of, and this is where the art comes in, you'll identify for you what constitutes an extremely important collector. But when we know them by name and when we can figure out ways to engage with them, this is really where this kind of relationship magic comes into play. So if you want to share the screen again.
Quick question before we do, from the group. Christine says, any specific suggestions for keeping tracking of customers, what they already own in their wish lists?
I do. Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. Basically, the best way is one you can commit to. I love one that's semi-digital, so you can be at a trade show, etc. But it's really just about it's like data in, right? So it's like, what kind of data are you putting into a system like this? It's really easy. And actually just before this call, I was on like a call with a potential client we'll be working with to implement the system that we typically use. And they had gone through kind of all these different complex programs. And it's really just about, what are you going to use? So I always suggest Excel first. This is just like basics. Excel. Jewelers are a particular breed, and I can say this because I'm a jeweler myself. We're deeply very smart, very detail oriented. So sometimes, especially when I find teaching technology to jewelers and my own experience with technology, sometimes it's so easy to want to get like deep into the weeds, as if we're studying like a little Melly diamond. But it's important to, with this kind of thing, keep the big picture. And I would always say, just start with an Excel sheet, like brain dump. You can even brain dump onto a piece of paper, but making sure for this holiday season, and then maybe in 2021, you're like, okay, now I'm going to really clean this whole thing up. But for right now, that you're actually just doing the work and not necessarily getting distracted by the system.
Yeah, I love that, what you can commit to. I love Google Sheets just because I can't lose that. I can like go in and search and like I won't lose it anywhere on my desktop or anywhere like that. But if it's easiest for you to just like write those 5 names and notes on a piece of paper for now, if that's what works best for you, I think that's fine as well.
Totally. Yeah. And there's like, this is a whole complex thing. I'm seeing Airtable. There's a lot of different things, but I really think at the end of the day, it's so much about like, what are you going to do right now? What's the quick and dirty version for this holiday season?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer this now, but someone's asking, how do you get spouse info for wish lists and birthdays? That's kind of a really specific question. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Sure, I'd love to. And I think that the question's really, really great. And I think that some of it will be answered through this framework because it's all about like keeping in touch and getting like finding ways to touch base before that birthday to basically, and this is great. Well, actually, let's answer it. It's like I love this question, and it's almost she skipped ahead to phase two. So
Okay.
let's answer it in line.
Cool. Okay, let's go back to our share. Cool.
Perfect. So phase 0, you've identified your people, right? They're in Excel, they're in Airtable, they're on sticky notes, they're in a notebook, but you've identified them. You might have had to look through your point of sale system. You might have had to look through your DMs. You might have had to look through, I work with multi-generational businesses. You might have had to look through like old paperwork, but you've identified some really important names for you and kind of what they've bought in the past and what they might be interested in. So the phase 1, right, the actual start of this framework, is that you're starting to get reacquainted. So this kind of starts to allude to, what do I do if I have a wish list? How do I get this contact information? And it's all about this reacquaintance period. And Liz, if you want to just stop this share for a moment so we can make sure that we don't go on to 3 before we cover 2. But it's just like a party. And this is why I wanted to answer this question kind of more in line. And it's actually a great one that we can kind of pull through this framework. Liz and I have committed to do some like bad role playing for you. So you can watch us be fools on Zoom, but 2, you can start to like, we're going to exemplify how this would feel for you if we were in person and not just online. So if we kind of move towards like, hey, can I have your spouse's email? I want to, text them your wish list. It would kind of feel like me walking up to Liz at a beer garden, for example. We're kind of on this beer kick, and saying like, hey, Liz, what was the name of this like random thing that we talked about many years ago? And she'd be like, whoa, it's good to see you, Kathleen. But she might back away and she might be like, whoa, that was aggressive. I thought we were just having beer. And it's so easy. And I think that this is where sales gets this bad stigma to kind of move to the sale really quickly, to be like all business all the time. And I don't know, have you been watching Emily in Paris, Liz?
I watched it all and I'm really embarrassed because as a social media person, I'm like, what are you doing?
Totally. I watched it all. I loved it. I love that genre. That's like one of my very favorite genres. But what really struck me of like how it relates to this legacy collector framework is that at the parties, Emily kept getting kind of in trouble with her Parisian colleagues because she wanted to talk business and they wanted to talk about anything other than business. And I really believe that social media is like this too. It's so easy when we're in business on social media to be like, buy my thing, buy my thing. Liz, what was that thing you needed from me? Before actually reconnecting on this human level first. So phase 1 is to take your extremely important collectors and go follow them on social media. Click like, click hello, share what they're up to, leave genuine comments, and do this for a week or 2 before you even get into their DMs, before you're really taking things to the next level, just like you would be if you saw one of them at a party. If you saw one of them at a party, you wouldn't be like, oh, buy this next piece. That would feel really aggressive. And that would make that thing where they want to like walk away, or it feels really salesy, or you see that dreaded scene at the bottom with no response on DMs. So actually spending some time getting to know them, having this back and forth around, really just their lives and acting interested in them. It's the difference between me coming up to Liz and saying like, oh my gosh, Liz, I've loved seeing what you've been up to. How are the dogs? How's the garden? That's been so fun this year to see that. And you can see like, I don't know if you're watching Liz's body language, but like she's smiling. Like that feels really good. That's very different than saying like, hey, Liz, buy my thing, or let's do something together. So it's like when we can give ourselves this permission to have a few of our important clients kind of on a slow burner, right? Where we're just kind of touching them, we're showing up in their world, we're virtually running into them. And that's really the first thing to do. And that feels really comfortable for all of us. So we're almost combating the mindset issues because we're just kind of communicating on this human level. Liz, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about trade shows and trunk shows. And, when you're meeting with a new retailer or somebody who already carries your work, when they walk up to your booth, the first thing the first thing you don't say is, hey, here's my new collection. You ask them how they are, how their family's doing, how their store's doing. Oh, I noticed you renovated, things like that. Like you're always kind of starting from a social place. Um, and when you're at those events post trade show, you're talking with potential clients about their life, and you're getting to know them really well. Same with trunk shows. Like somebody walks in the door, you get to know them, you ask them about their life. You mentioned the weather. You kind of start from a really soft place before you kind of start diving in, and you have to think about that with social media too. And a couple people here in the chat are saying, oh, we're not connected on social media, my clients don't use social media. Email is a great option as well, and especially in the world we're living in now, like reaching out and saying, hey, I wanted to check in, how are you doing, is a great place to start. And it doesn't need to be on social media.
It doesn't need to be on social. It doesn't need to be, it can be via text. It can even be a handwritten note and a gift. Like this is, if they are very kind of like extremely important collectors and they've spent with you over a certain period of time, you can create send some handwritten notes. And just really not about look at my new line or anything like that, as Liz, you really artfully put together. But it's just, how are you? I was thinking of you. I've got some amazing pieces. Here's my Instagram handle. I'd love to connect with you. Here's my phone number. I'd love to connect with you. We'll talk a little bit about specific messaging, but these are kind of like mindset gremlins. And this is kind of this like, again, because I'm a jeweler, I feel so like, don't take this the wrong way. People in the room, audience, beautiful audience. But it's so easy to get like I always call it like the through the loop. Like you're kind of looking at things, what we're saying, like through the loop of like, oh, my people aren't on social media, so this doesn't apply to me. But it's really about how can we make sure that we're connecting via email or text or handwritten notes. It's really what we're missing right now when we've gone almost completely virtual is this like kismet, is running into people. So we almost need to create it for ourselves and our clients. So the more you can take this, and a lot of, I think I saw in the notes too, a lot of people are on Facebook, like older clientele are on Facebook. A lot of people could potentially be on LinkedIn and might love to connect with you there. Like it's really just about remembering that you're a celebrity to these guys. Like people that you've worked with, you're like, I always tell the story of my engagement ring and how it's been 10 years. If she contacted me tomorrow with like, hey, Kathleen, how are you and your husband? I saw on social media that you had a son and now you have a dog and a house. Like, so great to see you. And then we had a little back and forth. And then she said, like, here are a pair of earrings I think you would love. Like, da, 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 da. And then we moved into business. I'd feel so seen, heard, and acknowledged by her. I wouldn't feel creeped out. She holds such a special place in my world. And I think it's really easy for the audience to not recognize how important you are in people's lives.
Yes, definitely. And just the act of reaching out to somebody to check in is a really special thing right now. So I think that's worth remembering. Linda's asking, is it acceptable to send an email or real mail with a discount code for the next purchase, or is that tacky? I would say don't necessarily lean on discount codes. I think, depending on your price point, how can you elevate that? How can you do something a little bit more special with that?
Totally. And like, this is the point of this level of the framework. We'll kind of talk about how to segue into talking about jewelry, but this level, if it's in any medium, if it's in person, if it's in text or email or social media, is to just connect on a human level. So it's like the difference between me and Liz, say like me coming up to Liz and like trying to hard sell her on something when we see each other at a party, versus me and Liz, like where I come up to Liz and I say like, how are the dogs? How are the gardens? Like, how is everything, going for you? And just connecting on that human level. So it's tempting to skip this step as we just stated in this question. It's really tempting to skip this step because like this is a item on your to-do list that you want to get through. But the more you can actually let the relationship gel and like let the intrigue happen, the more the next steps are really natural and easy. And you don't feel like you're selling it to them. They don't feel like they're being sold for, but they're kind of on this journey with you. So that's a great segue into our next phase. If you want to share the screen again, Liz.
Yeah, definitely. I think that something to mention is that there's no easy way around this. Like there's no way to quick selling. You cannot skip this relationship building.
Perfect. So once you're getting reacquainted, we're kind of stepping into phase 2, and we talked about it a little bit, but this should be short, light, and personal, not necessarily about jewelry. Like this is really just about like, Liz, like I see you've picked up embroidery. Like what is your favorite project you're working on right now? Like it's really, and again, Liz just said it, there's no easy way around it. This is easiest on social media because you have something to connect with and respond to. So if you've been a person who hasn't been using Facebook, for example, I always love to kind of say that this is a great time to like reacquaint yourself with Facebook. And I believe using your personal Facebook page as a way to connect with clients can be really great. That's like its own kind of segue. But some of your clients might not be on Instagram, and you might find that like actually connecting with them on social media is a really great place to be. So it's really just like about establishing this back and forth, this rapport, liking what they're up to, kind of having this like conversation get started around a shared interest they have, but not necessarily about jewelry. And then we move to phase 3. So this is kind of the phase that it's easy to start in. But it is, if we start there, this is where a lot of those objections that we're coming up against are actually from. The feelings we have of like too salesy, door-to-door salesman, aggressive. I know a lot of students I speak with feel that they're either like only acquaintance-y, and then all of a sudden they put on their sales hat and they're like hard selling. And it's really about how do we create that bridge? How do we create that moment from the relationship into moving the conversation into jewelry? So this is why we do, and this is actually another kind of framework that we don't have a time to like fully dive into, but I call it the 5-minute dossier. So once you've created your extremely important clients list, you have that Excel list, you have your sticky notes, you start to jot down what they might be interested in. So you're kind of working from your ultimate goal from the beginning. So when I've connected with Liz about, kind of her embroidery projects that she's been working on, I already have on my note that she loves gold antique hoops, especially those are goats. I love those earrings, Liz.
These are, I think they're, oh my gosh, rams.
They're rams.
Yeah.
So like on Liz's dossier, I've written like loves vintage ram jewelry. And it just happens to have like, now we've talked about embroidery and I'm like, oh my gosh, Liz, this is crazy. But I actually had this unbelievable pair of antique earrings cross my desk. They're not on social media. They're not on my website. In fact, no one has seen them. Can I send you a picture? And Liz is like, yes, please. And it's really, that's where like, this is not about discount codes. This is not about wish lists. This is really about connecting around your shared love of jewelry. So when we can use your mind, like use your very, very powerful mind and shift your mindset around sales being slimy and aggressive into this like beautiful experience of connecting on this human level, and then starting to show some beautiful behind the scenes moments that other people don't have access to. And then you're kind of going back and forth. So this could be, I have some pieces that I think would be amazing for your wish list. Would you like to hear more? Would you like to see some photos? Like we're getting consent along the way. And Liz, you can stop the share here for a moment. But we have to get consent. And I think that that's when Liz and I when we audit behind the scenes, because we're behind the scenes so many pieces, it's like we need to make sure that we're having what I like to call micro conversations. Like they're short little conversations that happen. So each moment that you are going to show something to do with jewelry, you're getting a yes. You're getting a moment of yes. Oh, would you like to see more? I'd love to see more. So you're basically selling them kind of throughout this process. So I always feel like, I mean, this is kind of like an age old adage, but people don't like to be sold to, but they love to kind of buy. So when you're pulling people like deeper and deeper and giving them a little bit behind the scenes, because again, you already identified what they might be interested in, this is where selling feels really, really beautiful for both people. Do you have
Yeah,
anything to add there, Liz?
I was just going to say that moment when somebody's like, oh, I've been looking for, a ruby pendant with granulation around it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I have that sort of thing. That like feels like a really good moment. Like you are providing a really special thing to somebody. And I think that if you keep remembering that you might be giving somebody exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they need, I think that feels really good.
100%. And it's really about knowing those things. And I think I just saw a question come in, a really great one. I have an extensive customer list. Is there a way to merge with Facebook, or do I have to look up each client individually? And this is the reason that, phase 0 is identify your extremely important collectors, because this takes work. What I love about Liz, and speaking with Liz, is like, we're not going to sugarcoat anything for you. Like, this takes work. This is a fair amount of effort, which is why we only want to do it with our top clients. Like, we can't do this with everyone. And this is why, in the teaching I do, I encourage my students to go high end in their price points. And we do a lot of work around mindset and money mindset and moving high end and working with high net worth clients. But another reason is that it takes your time to do this kind of work. Like, we can't just mass email people. Like, that's the opposite of what I'm telling you to do. Like, what I'm telling you to do is actually choose your top 20% of your clients, and maybe 10 people. If you have like a large staff, it could be up to 50 people that you're going to engage with in this way. But it's really about quality over quantity. Like, the more you can have this feel really genuine, really personal, as Liz just said, that like oh my gosh, this ruby granulated necklace, like, oh my gosh. But you have to know that, like, it's really about, it's like a different approach to business. It's like a very old school approach to business. And like, I feel that if you guys are avid watchers of my webinars, you'll often recognize this picture, but I have a picture of my grandparents on my desk, because I like to kind of think like, what would they have done? Like, they weren't jewelers. They were like really brilliant mathematicians, but they lived in such a different era. They lived in an era that was like slower, obviously, but it was more connected. And I think sometimes the problems of our modern times is that it's like, we have 10,000 Instagram followers, but no genuine connection with any of them. And it's really about, we have this extensive list on MailChimp, and we've been working to grow it and grow it and grow it, but no one's replying back. Like, no one's really engaging with us. And I think what I offer and what I've really found to work is actually, if you have this hyper curated list of 20 people who buy every single thing you produce for every birthday, anniversary, and then they bring their friends, like, that's the kind of business that most artists and designers I work with actually want. They want that kind of business. It's intimate. It's like, they know the pieces they're creating are for the pieces who people are going to love them and wear them. So it's a really good question. And I think it's really about working backwards, identifying who you want to engage with, who you want to have come to your party, knowing their very favorite type of food, and then serving that food.
Yeah, I love that. It takes work. It definitely takes work. A question I just thought of concerning phase 0. And many designers might be thinking this, I don't have any clients. I don't feel like I have any leads.
Yeah. And this is like, I know especially people who are just getting started, I think really feel this. And I think I'm going to answer it in this way. You can have an amazing business if you only work with friends and family. You can have a fantastic, established, highly, like, you can hit the $1 million mark with only working with friends and family and taking exquisite care of them, because then they tell their friends. I have an amazing client I've worked with, Christine Lupo, who maybe is on the call with us, but she said she can track her whole business. She's had this like amazing 20-year career, and she had a physical brick and mortar, and then now she's working, she's like a premier private jeweler. She's like, I can track almost my whole business to a few people at the beginning. So it like gives me chills when I hear that question, because it's like, it just makes me think that as designers, you don't know how special you've been to, like, no one in this room on this webinar has not created and sold some pieces, even if they've been to friends and family, even if they've been sold off their bodies and they don't have the, there is like a record keeping, and this is where we can plant a tree. What the best time is 20 years ago and the second best is today. So it's like, yes, we can improve our record keeping, but we have to have lots of grace with ourselves if we haven't had great record keeping. But you can use this technique, take exquisite care of your first 5 clients, and grow a stunning long-term legacy business out of nurturing those relationships.
Definitely. Sarah's saying my sister has made more sales than anyone. And so many fine jewelry businesses and jewelry businesses have started that way. And I think that starting small is the best way to start. I mean, looking at Todd Reed, for example, like he started selling to friends and family. Like everybody starts there. So really nurturing that. So if you can think of 5 names to nurture this holiday season, that is a great starting point.
100%. And it like gives me chills. And I think it's like, I think we have to almost like dismantle what we think our business will look like. Like we really have to understand like that. If you work, like I like to kind of say, it's like, if no new clients ever came in your doors, if you like kind of put out that red velvet rope and it was referral only, your business honestly would probably grow, because it's like, ooh, it's like exclusive, it's referral only. And I think that it's like kind of removing that shame and that stigma of like selling to friends and family. Because, as I think Sarah just said, my sister's made me more sales than anyone. Exactly. Like it's because she's connected and she's like wearing the pieces and, having these relationships. So it's like, how can we find those people in our lives too, who will be these, hyper referrers? And really it's usually in these, and that's why your extremely important collectors could be your sister, right? Who connects you with everyone. Maybe she's not a big buyer, but you are like, I always want her to be wearing my jewelry, right? Like I send her new pieces of my collection so she wears them and then she ends up selling them off her. So we can be really creative with this framework. I really truly believe that this is an art, not a science. There's very little that's like 100% repeatable here, but this is teaching you the foundations that then you can play around with and really riff off, as long as you keep the fundamentals here. Like we need to know our top people. We need to connect with them on a human level and not just like be doing business with them. And then we need to figure out our own kind of creative ways to segue into our shared love of jewelry. And then we need to close it, right? Like we need to figure out like, what's our call to action? Like, do we close jewelry, right? Or close jewelry sales right now directly on Instagram? Do we text our clients and they text us their credit card information? Do we hop on a little video call like Liz and I are doing and collect our credit card information there? Are you sending pieces, on approval or on memo, like kind of a try it on service? Like how are you, I should say, using some of these ideas to actually like actively close these pieces or close these sales of jewelry?
Right. And your call to action can be, do you want some pieces on approval? I keep telling people right now, like, get that money. Like if it's Venmo, that's totally fine. You don't need to go through a formal website or anything like that, but really having a call to action, like ending these conversations. Once you get to the point of talking about jewelry and showing them jewelry, like think about how you can have a call to action. And a call to action can be as light as like, do you want to see more? What type of jewelry are you looking for? Like, and getting answers to some of these questions and then diving in. Do you want me to send you an invoice, sort of thing, and like closing the sale?
100%. And Dor, we've got some questions about, can't be okay to text credit card info. You'll be surprised how comfortable clients can be to have that. And like, that's its own security issue. So I can't weigh in on that, but it's really about how can we make the experience feel relaxed for our clients, feel very taken care of for our clients. It's really risky to be in like here, maybe we'll role play because I love to make this visual for you guys, but me standing in my studio. But it's like the difference between going through this really intimate process if you're selling in person and then saying like, perfect, the checkout's over there. and like letting them kind of like self-check out at Target. That's the same equivalent when you just send them to your website and let them take care of it. They are going to get distracted. They'll pick up their phones. They're like, got a text from their nanny, like they're gone. So the more you can, as Liz is saying, use like alternative banking, Venmo. A lot of my clients do take text images from their clients. And again, not a lawyer, don't play one, not a security internet expert. So it's like, do this at your own risk. But people are feeling very comfortable with that these days. So it's like figuring out your systems that you feel comfortable with, but making sure you're not abandoning them to self-checkout. And this brings us kind of in a pretty great segue into our next topic, which is objections. And we'll talk about it from two angles. But the first angle is that I want you to think about objections and actually embrace them. So actually actively know that when you're in the objection phase of this DM conversation, for example, it's when you're getting closer to the cash register. And I sold behind the like counter of a jewelry store. So I always have like a real visual of what this feels like. But it's like we were talking and our engagement rings were kind of in the window. We'd be talking about engagement ring. And as we were kind of moving closer to buying and selling, like we were going to take the credit card information, doop, 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 objections would come up. And that actually means we're getting closer to the sales experience, like the actual transaction piece. To sort of reframe it is like the transformation piece, right? Like they get to leave with this beautiful piece of jewelry. It's beneficial to them. So when we hear about objections, it's like we want to embrace objections. We want to love hearing objections. So Liz, we have two questions, answer these questions in the chat box. We'd love to hear objections from two angles, right? Like, what are your objections to selling? And we've been hearing some of them, but like when we're talking about this, like what kind of gremlins come up with you? I think we've seen some mindset shifts over in the chat, but what are you feeling like is holding back from you selling? And then what is holding your clients and leads back from buying? And we have a few, and we can just kind of, if you want to stop the share here, Liz, we can kind of go to the chat and see as people are putting them in. But we have some common ones that we've heard that we kind of have like artful answers for you. Again, it's like this, everything needs to go through your own brand filter. But one that we often hear is like, whoa, this is really expensive, right? Like, oh my gosh, wow, this is more than I had anticipated. And I think we need to kind of, as designers, start to disassociate isn't quite the right word, but like recognize that if someone feels like it's too expensive, we don't need to jump in to solve that for them. That's okay. Everyone's budget is different. Everyone's zeros are different in their bank account. So when we hear a question like that, it can be really easy to say, oh, now they want a discount or they don't want this piece. But really, they've just shared some information with you. Wow, this is more expensive than I thought. So if you're with them verbally, one, I always recommend practicing objections, kind of getting them and responding to them. But two, so if you're in person, it's a little bit harder, but if you're in chat, you have a moment to compose yourself, but compose yourself, right? Like, okay, cool. This isn't them asking for a discount. This isn't them asking anything except that they were surprised at how much money this was. So when you get an objection like that, you can say something like, oh, compared to what? Or this is a great period for you to actually dive into your benefits. So like, yes, everything is handmade in New York City and I use all recycled gold. I find, I source all the stones myself, which means I travel extensively. I look through actually to find this labradorite that is here. I actually looked through, 100 different labradorites when I was in Vegas looking for stones. So actually, I know that these are the highest quality labradorites here. So that's kind of the long fix to these questions is you need to be in everything you're doing. So like Liz teaches and like Liz's brilliance is in kind of showing that to begin with. So when you're getting to these objections, it's a moment for you to reiterate what they already know, that you hand source things, that you use fair gold, that you pay living wages, that you're building a legacy brand that like will be around again and again. Liz, what are your thoughts? And I think there's a lot of questions in the chat, which is fun.
Yeah, very fun. I totally agree. I think that a big objection is, oh, that's too much money. I can't afford that. So there's a lot of different ways you can come at that. One is, again, reiterating this, how special the piece is, that it's handcrafted, the materials you're using, all of that. And then two is like, oh, well, I have these other great pieces that are a little bit lower price point that might be good. So like being ready with that kind of information is always good. I don't necessarily believe in discounting, but you could always, if it's, somebody you really want to sell this piece, you want to move this piece, like, oh, well, maybe I could do it for you, just for you this one time for this price. You can always go that direction if it's a sale that you really, really want. But I don't always recommend leaning on that. It's just like a tool you can have in your toolbox.
Totally. And we need to like understand the true objections. So it's like a lot of times it's easy to jump towards like, oh, they want a discount, that's why they're asking this. But they actually might want to be reassured about why your prices are 4 times like the linen sheets you were looking at, Liz, you probably could have gotten on Amazon for 4 times less that price that you paid. So lots of times when you come up against a price objection, what they're actually looking for is reassurance that what they're getting is the quality that they would have hoped for. So they're actually, when you start to discount and go down that road, that's not what it's like, you're missing the question. The question is actually, where was this made? How can I know? What do I, how can I be reassured that the quality is what I'll be paying for? So it's a really great kind of reframe to stick with that. And then you might have lower price point pieces, but you can also say like, this is great. Shall I put it on your wish list? Is there someone special I could connect with who might want to know about the wish list, to kind of circle back to that wish list conversation? It could be, at this point, you could, if you do layaways, or, I know a lot of jewelers I work with are partnering with like an Affirm, or there's all these different platforms that allow for payments over time. This is where you could tell people about like other options that you have for them. But I think it can be really easy to hear, especially in the written word, to hear like, wow, or you say the price and then you never hear anything else. It can be maybe not the objection about the price, but actually trying to understand what the true objection is.
Right, which is a whole other mindset shift that we could do a whole webinar on, is like being comfortable with your pricing and practicing being comfortable with your pricing, because I find a lot of jewelers aren't.
Yeah, and that will come through. So like truly, and this is a big thing, I run a group program called the High-End Jewelers Society, and we do so much on pricing, and we really dive deep into like a dollar is not a dollar is not a dollar. Like you charging $2,800, for example, doesn't mean you get $2,800. It actually means you probably get $300 in your own bank account, like at the end of the day, after taxes and materials and business expenses and material expense, all these different things. So it's like, how do we, I think, yeah, it's a
huge topic, which is important, but not something we should necessarily cover here. But practicing your pricing and feel confident in that. And that's just a mindset shift you need to work on in general. And also remember that not every person you're talking to fully understands what handcrafted jewelry is. So if you're handcrafting a chain and you're making each link, maybe describe that to them. Like, each one is very unique because I create each link and put it together. And I mean, you'll feel the difference of this like buttery, handcrafted chain sort of thing. Like think about how you can romance it for people.
Oh my God, that's so fun. Yeah, I think and that's really where it almost influences now. Like I want you to keep note of the objections you get, because now you need to create the long fix for no longer getting price objections, is to show people how much work goes into everything. To really show that like, these are the ancient techniques I use. This is how I mean, as a jewelry, apprentice jeweler, I know how long it takes to make these things, like handmade findings. Oh my gosh, so elaborate, so intense to look through all these stones. So the more you can kind of bring the people who are your leads through that process, so when they get to, it's like, I feel that the best analogies are always out of industry. And I like to think kind of the restaurant industry as a really great example. Like, what kind of restaurant you're walking into, typically before you see the menu, you kind of have an idea of what the prices will be. So the more kind of high-end restaurant you walk into, it's a lot of the same ingredients, but you won't be surprised to encounter a $50 entree, a $70 entree, $200 bottles of wine. So the more you can have your branding be cohesive, have your social media plan kind of lead you towards everything's handcrafted. And this is what it means. What you're comparing me to is made in a factory in China, like kind of, you don't even need to say it, but you can kind of say, these are what other people are doing. So if you're price shopping paperclip chains, which are like super popular right now, know that these will fall apart. The edges are rough, like all these things that like we know because we're like insane details people, but your average consumer won't understand necessarily.
Right. Definitely. So let's dive into some of these objections. The first one, Autumn, really, really deep. Fear of success is holding her back from selling.
And that's a great one. And that is like really deep. And we're going there, Autumn. And it's sometimes like, is it the problems that come with success? Like the obligation of being successful? Lots of times it comes from our peers or our family. A lot of times I find the kind of hardest moment that most designers I work with, specifically around pricing, is the moment where either they can no longer afford their jewelry, but most importantly, where their family can no longer afford their jewelry. And like, I get chills saying that. It's really hard to be the highest earning person in your lineage, especially as a woman. And I won't make the assumption that everyone in this room is a woman, but for so many years, generations and like going back so far, it's been really scary to be a visible woman, a high performing woman. Like literally you were burned at the stake. Like not to go, I mean, Autumn brought it up, so we'll go there for right now. But Patriarchal Stress Disorder is a really great book about this very topic, about like kind of how it feels as a modern woman to be successful in business and how it actually brings up like survival instincts kind of kick in and we can want to keep ourselves small. So big pieces, but some smaller like action items are take advice from people on the field. It's so easy to get advice from our parents or our siblings or our friends. And they'll typically say like, oh my God, that's so much money. And it will like trigger feelings in them. And then it can be like, oh my gosh, who would spend all that much money? My parents wouldn't buy it. My peers wouldn't buy it. But that's okay. We need to like take advice. And that's why I feel like it's so important to spend time with designers, like everyone has chosen to do on this Tuesday afternoon, who are doing the same thing that you are, because other people who are not business owners don't understand how expensive it is to run a business. So it's like when we think about pricing and having especially higher prices, and we're crowdsourcing from other designers, businesses, or most importantly, friends and family, and kind of running our prices by them and then reacting to what they're putting out, it can kind of trigger this like fear of success. So one, be aware of who you're taking advice from. But number two is to block those people on social media. I was going to say block those bitches, but it didn't sound 100% right because we know they're not bitches. They're our friends and family who we love dearly. But I'm a huge proponent of going through, especially if you kind of start reinvigorating your Facebook personal page. You might have like uncles on there or grandma or like people who, or like old friends from high school who you just like, they'll never buy from you. So giving yourself permission to have your Instagram, have your Facebook, have your social media feed, have your email list, really be highly curated with people who are likely to buy from you. And sometimes just taking these simple steps of like blocking and removing old friends, old people, a lot of times it's other jewelers who probably won't buy from us. But sometimes they will. So, use your own discretion here. But that can kind of start to combat that fear of success because you're then kind of showcasing and at the party with your colleagues instead of at your like family barbecue trying to sell them $5,000 earrings. Like they're not going to buy. And in fact, they might get so uncomfortable that it makes you uncomfortable. That's another webinar, Liz. We've got our series.
You and I could speak forever, which we had mentioned when we were preparing for this.
Yes,
so what was the name of that book you mentioned again?
The Patriarchal Stress Disorder. Cool. I'm going to go grab it. It's so good.
Cool. And then I'm going to kind of lump some of these into a couple common objections, which some of these we talked about.
It's at home.
Here's a Oh, it's at home. Okay, that's fine. I'll find the link and share it with everyone in the email we send with the recap and the replay link.
Perfect.
But how do you, so this, I think I know the answer to, but I'd love to hear from you. Like clients who respond to like you know, they're interested in a piece, you tell them about it, and then they want to think about it. How do you come back to that?
I always love to like kind of lead with what makes this piece really special and one of a kind. And so it's like, you know, I totally understand. One, how long do you need to think about it? Like, you know, I can, like, do you need to speak with your spouse? Of course, no problem. Like, all right, you need the weekend. Let's hop on another call on Monday. You know, if you're kind of talking to people, like, so perfect. Let's hop on another call on Monday. I'd love to, you know, connect with you then. Or perfect, you need the weekend. Let's connect here in Instagram on Monday. But I think making sure you're always reiterating how unique, like, you know, like I have a few other people interested in this piece, or like this, you know, Burmese ruby was really, really, really rare. I've actually never seen one quite like it come across my desk. So, you know, if you do come back in 6 months, you know, it just might not be here. And like, that's not false scarcity. That's like true scarcity. So continuing to let people know that like these pieces are rare, one of a kind. Even if it's a production piece, you can kind of say like, these are, you know, if you're hoping to have this for the holidays, I only have so many in stock and I typically won't be making any more. So if you wanted to, you know, have this in time for, you know, your spouse's birthday, like I would need to know by Tuesday, for example. What are your thoughts, Liz? I know you had some thoughts off the bat too.
Yeah, I was just thinking like always follow up as the main response to that is like make sure you come back and follow up with those people who have said they wanted to think about it. You know, follow up regularly. You know what I mean? I think that that's really important to like put them on either your notebook sheet that you're writing on or your Excel program or your fancy CRM system. Like make sure you note that even if it is just an Instagram message and come back to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where having, you know, some sort of reminder system where you're like, oh, this is a lead and I need to, you know, this is where like dedicated time to combing through your inbox is really helpful. To be the one following up, keeping in touch, letting them know about, you know, new pieces that came in, just like that piece, if that piece sold. And then especially as you have other people interested in a piece, let that other person know, like, hey, I just wanted to reach out, like connect as a human first, right? Like always connect, and then say like, hey, I actually thought of you the other day because I had someone come in and take a look at this piece. They haven't bought it yet, but I wanted to let you know that they were serious buyers and, you know, they might just, if you wanted this piece, you know, I'd be happy to give you first right of refuse. Like it's in a way, it's like real estate, what we do. But it's really just about staying in connection and communication.
Definitely. So how do you respond to somebody's objection if they're like, I'm too busy, I'm overwhelmed, I can't handle this right now? In probably different words, they're saying this, but
Yeah,
a sense of overwhelm.
we see that a lot, especially right now. And part of it is like, this is why it's an art. There's no like one thing to say to that, but it is like hearing them as a person. And that's really like when we sell high end, we don't just sell it to just add zeros on and like make more money and like swim around in our cash. We do it because we're actually charging higher prices to work with fewer people so we can spend more time with them. And this is what I like to call the upward cycle that we step into when we step into selling higher end. You can, you know, what used to take selling to 10 people now takes selling to 5 people to make the same exact amount of money. So with each of those 5 people, you can spend more time being like, wow, what's going on? Like, you seem really overwhelmed. Like, can we just like talk as people right now? Like, what's happening? I'd love to like be here for you. And really taking that time to understand kind of where they're at. I think ultimately people, it's like we've always been overwhelmed by things. You know, we've always had clients who are kind of overwhelmed and distracted. And that's really where we can take the time to like hear them as people and really connect on that human level and then follow up with them. You know, really make it easy for them. If getting on a quick call is the thing for them, if doing like more of a memo box, if you were taking in-person appointments, like figuring out for them what would be the easiest way to support them and have it feel really easeful and luxurious to work with you. What are your thoughts, Liz?
Yeah, definitely. I think that acknowledging that, the world is crazy right now, and really meeting them where they're at and hearing them, I think is super important. And that's something sometimes you're tempted to breeze right past, like, oh, well, I'll get in touch later, or, head right to the sale, or whatever it is. But you kind of have to nurture that and say exactly what Kathleen was saying, like, really like connect with them on that, because I think we can all relate to that feeling of overwhelm right now.
100%. And it doesn't mean they don't want it, the piece.
Mhm.
Like it's just they might feel embarrassed. Like I think that this is where it's really important to remember that you're like a celebrity to them. So when you're responding and reaching out to them, they want to be responsive. So you might get a lot of apologies of like, oh my God, I totally dropped the ball on getting back to you. And that's when you can just like have so much grace and be like, no problem. I get it. You said, your kids are like so young and you're doing so great. And I love chatting with you. And like, don't ever worry about like dropping the ball. I do it, like whatever you need to do, like to kind of make them feel at ease. And it's like this idea that people will never buy jewelry unless they feel comfortable and relaxed. So when we're in the virtual space, it's no different. So the more you can be this like really kind of easy to work with and understanding what their needs are kind of person. And then we step into boundaries, which is this whole other webinar topic that we'll go down another time. But yeah, the more you can kind of meet them and see them and take your time with them, that's really where you can start to charge these higher premium prices.
So this objection is really relevant to now, but I have no place to wear it.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, Liz, when we were preparing this call, it's like, I feel that we're really getting to the essence of why we have jewelry and why we wear jewelry. And that like jewelry is meant to be special jewelry is meant to be worn right now. So it's like, who would see it is kind of that question. Like, that's what this person is asking. And the answer is like, you would see this. Like, imagine the feeling. And I think this is where I have another whole framework that I teach, which is the 10 pillars of selling to affluent clients. And one of the big pillars is like deep listening. And when we can connect the piece back to their why, like, so it's like, yeah, I know that you are not currently leaving your house, but like this, granulated cuff, I know you wanted to buy this piece because you've just, finished chemo or graduated from, this really prestigious grad school, or like kind of connecting, like getting out why they want to buy it. And then connecting this like objection, which is like, who would see it, to like, listen, like, I understand you, who would see it, what crazy times we live in, but like you would see it. And like you shared, you want to buy this piece for your wife because she's had this beautiful milestone, or like you want to buy this piece for yourself because you just had a baby, or like you've done this huge thing in 2020 that you never thought you'd be able to do. And just simply taking like your deep listening skills and reconnecting it to the person on the other end.
Yeah, Shelly had the great response about nowhere to wear it. A woman told me she buys the jewelry for herself to see, no one else. Totally. And I think a lot of people put on jewelry as personal talismans, as like right now protective talismans. I mean, we're seeing endless charms, and like curated collections and like special stones being like worn and really special. And going into holiday, that's something to consider as you're telling the story, as you're talking to people. Is like this, you're connecting to this piece, so it's a really important thing to add to your collection.
100%. Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat like metaphysical properties on Zoom. Like it really is. And I truly believe that we're like kind of coming back to why we wear jewelry. Like if it isn't in clothes and hair and all these things, like if it isn't performative, if it isn't for someone else, like how are we, like I see like my son and my husband pretty much exclusively, and like but I wear perfume, right? Like I wear perfume to stand in my studio by myself. So it is like, how do we, you can't smell me, Liz, you don't know. But it's like, how do we, it's like almost this like, yeah, these are big questions, but like, why do we wear jewelry if it is just for ourselves? And like, why do we give jewelry, and like talking through legacy? I know you wanted this present because you just had a baby, and like, imagine how it will feel when you pass this on to your granddaughter. Like just starting to connect with like the emotional elements. I think when we're online, it's really easy to just focus on features. and never touch on, like, as Liz was saying, the romance or like why you would wear it, how you wear it, those different types of things.
Yeah, definitely. I love, I put on perfume the other day after not wearing it for like 6 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better about myself, like sniffing, like smelling this. It just feels really nice, you know?
Mhm.
So I love that. I love thinking about it that way. So we have to start wrapping up, um, even though like we could talk forever. So um, let's get into how you can work with us, and then feel free to leave any questions and we'll see what we can get to.
Perfect. And I saw, before you do that, Liz, I
Yeah,
just
sure.
saw like one question that I want to just make sure I touch on.
Yeah.
I think someone asked, like, why would I kind of went down a little bit of a tangent about blocking people and like how that can help you with your fear of success. And it's less about you can ignore them, but something about energetically not like, it's like we want to be selling to the right room.
Mhm.
So if we consistently find that people are like, oh my God, that's so expensive, etc., even energetically sometimes. And again, like I've said, like I'm alone, I'm pretending, right? Like there's an element of performativeness to doing virtual, but especially in our online spaces. So it's like, who do I want milling about my store? Who do I want milling about my restaurant? I don't want people who are not going to buy. So when we think of kind of reviving our Instagram or curating our lists on Instagram, curating our extremely important collectors on Facebook, etc. We really just want to surround ourselves with people. And it's not that we need to live in an echo chamber in every place in our life, but especially if we think of our virtual showroom as extending beyond our website to our social media, we really only want buyers on those platforms. So the more you can kind of curate your lists, really the better.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes you're scrolling past something and you don't realize it's affecting you and it's affecting you. So sometimes getting rid of that energy is just really good.
Mhm.
I completely agree. So um, leave your questions. We'll see what we can get to. If you want to keep working with me, I have an online community. It's $40 a month. Um, Sign up, you get instant access to 30 plus videos. There's some great videos with Kathleen that we've done before, and I bring on industry experts like Kathleen to have conversations like this every month. And then I check in every week. We do hot seats. It's really hands-on for a really great price. So the link is there, but let me know if you have any questions. I'm glad to talk you through that. And then Kathleen has some really exciting stuff coming up.
I do. Yeah. So I run a program called the High End Jewelers Society, and we focus pretty exclusively on like direct to consumer, like making that transition into direct to consumer. And we really look for having a lot of what we talked about today. Like what are the frameworks and the systems and like that, kind of CRM world, but we don't touch that until we get the fundamentals in place. But what are these pricing for profit? How do I go through exactly the legacy selling framework that we talked about? We touched the tip of the iceberg on, and how do I amplify my visibility to attract new leads and then re-engage with existing leads. And it all sits kind of under what I call the Wealthy Jeweler framework. And on December 10th, I'm doing like an application only exclusive private training on the Wealthy Jeweler framework. So if you would like to apply to be considered to join that training, you can go to kathleencutler.com/apply. And that will give you a lot more information about the program and also allow you to apply for that exclusive private training on December 10th.
And I've heard endless good things from clients that I know, people that I know who have taken this. So it's a really great, I hear great things.
Thanks.
So
yeah, it's like really, we tell you what to do. Like it's very like this week you should do this week you should do this week you should do this. Like it's very, we hold your hand, we support you, you get a lot of critique on your work, we review what you're putting out there. So it's like really, it's like it's like the MBA for jewelers.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes you just need guidelines or help or support. So can you respond to maybe how high end, Kathleen?
Sure. So we really love to say there's kind of like two main people we work with. We work with people who are already selling kind of like that high end 10,000 and above, like that's where they are already. Or we also work with people who understand that if they get to that $5,000, $10,000 price point, they can step into that upward spiral of working with fewer clients, taking more exquisite care with them, and that's really what they want to go there, and they need the guidance to sunset. Like we've had some students who've completely sunsetted their silver lines and are now only working in gold. So it's either you're already in that high end space, or you know that that's like the step you need to take, especially as you go direct to consumer.
Great. Yeah. So for people who are already high end and also people who want to get there.
Exactly. Yeah, Sarah is one of my students. So yeah, she says it's so good. Yeah, Sarah, as like just a phenomenal student, just did an amazing job of really stepping into her like premier high end. She does so many engagement rings. I think you showed her. I think, to quote Sarah, I think she said her highest sale was her easiest yet. Like when I remember her like highest price point that she sold, I think she texted me after, messaged me. She was like, that was so easy. That was like, they didn't blank at the price. Like, oh my God, I totally get it. Now I'm hooked. So there really is sometimes when we step into that higher end, it's this upward cycle, and everyone knows the downward cycle, which is like selling to really price conscious people who can't afford it and don't want to buy it. And then they're paying pains to work with, etc. So it's like we really step into the other side of things.
Yeah, that's great. And then here's our contact information down here if you have any questions about either how to work with me, how to work with Kathleen, about her upcoming program, or if you have any questions about anything we talked about today. We're both super responsive, especially on Instagram. Feel free to DM us. Feel free to let us know you watched. That would be great too. Both our handles are here.
I'd love to know your biggest takeaway. Like if you can DM us your biggest takeaway, that would be awesome. Because and like what Liz and I really truly want is like when you apply what we've taught you and like you have a big win. Like we want to hear that, because it's so exciting to see. Like I get, my Instagram is full of DMs of like, I did it and someone bought. Like I just reached out to my dentist and like, oh my God, he just bought a $3,000 item. Or like I did what you did and like, or told me to do, and I connected with past clients, and like now I'm totally booked out for December. So it's really exciting to hear your wins. So we'd love to hear your biggest takeaway and then also your wins.
Yeah, definitely. We love success stories. We'd love to hear what really impacted you from this so we can develop more content that would be suited for you. And anything like that, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And then, so the recording of this webinar and a little recap of everything we talked about, links to everything we discussed at the end here will be sent out tomorrow. So don't worry if you missed anything, you will get a replay. Thank you so much for being here. Kathleen, thank you so much. This was really great information.
So excited to chat. And yeah, just keep it simple. Like it really is, to just fully recap the whole thing we've talked about is phase 0, find your clients. Phase 1 is start to engage with them. Phase 2 is have a beautiful conversation. And then phase 3 is to move it towards jewelry and really embrace objections and like have it feel really, really good to sell as an act of service.
Yep, that's great. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon and have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.